Silence swallowed the kitchen. Not the quiet of an empty room, but the suffocating silence of a moment fracturing into before and after. Aria Sinclair stumbled through the door at exactly 11:51 p.m., and the October wind followed her like a curse, slamming against the frame with the force of a living thing. Dead leaves scattered across the hardwood floor, skittering in patterns that looked almost like screams. She was 27 years old but looked like someone much older, someone who had lived 100 years of pain in a single body. Blood soaked through the black and white maid uniform, dark and spreading, pooling at the seams. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, purple and black and swollen so badly it looked like her face had been rebuilt wrong. Her blonde hair, which she always kept in a careful braid for work, was plastered to her pale skin with sweat and melted snow. Her split lip still bled, slow and steady, each drop falling like a metronome of suffering. Her hands trembled so violently she could not grip the doorframe. She tried. Her fingers curved around the wood, but her body betrayed her, shaking like a leaf in that October wind, like something that had been torn from its tree and could not remember how to be still. She collapsed against the granite counter without seeing him. Nicholas Bianchi emerged from the study like a shadow taking human form. He was 38 years old, 6'3", moving with the controlled precision of a man who had learned long ago that every gesture carried weight. Black sweater, dark jeans, expensive and understated. His dark hair had threads of silver running through it now, visible in the lamplight, and his ice-blue eyes missed nothing. They moved across the kitchen in that split second before his body fully emerged from the study, cataloguing the blood on the floor, the open door, the trembling woman whose face he could not quite see. He froze. Marco and Dario, his lieutenants, stood behind him in dark suits that cost more than most people made in a year. They had been discussing territories, the usual cold mathematics of power. Their hands moved instinctively toward weapons, trained responses to any breach of the lodge's security. But Nicholas raised one hand, slow and deliberate, and both men stopped as if their bodies no longer belonged to them. "Stand down," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. The sound of Aria's breathing filled the kitchen. It was ragged, broken, the breathing of someone who had run until her lungs forgot how to work. She was trying to stand, her legs moving beneath her in a way that suggested her brain had not received the message that her body could no longer obey. Nicholas moved forward slowly, each step measured, each movement controlled. He had learned this from his father, learned to move like a predator, like a man who understood that speed was less important than inevitability. He stopped 3 feet away from her, and when he spoke, his voice was lower, softer, a different instrument entirely. "Who did this to you?" Aria's one good eye opened. It was green, that one eye, and it widened in pure terror when it found him in the shadows. She recognized him immediately. 8 months of cleaning his house, of being invisible in the way that service workers become invisible, of moving through rooms while the people in them looked through her. She had never spoken to him directly. She had been trained not to. But now she recognized the man whose photograph appeared in articles she read at the public library during her lunch break, articles that whispered about the Bianchi Empire, about power, about danger. She tried to back away, but her legs would not hold her. They folded beneath her like paper, and she caught herself against the counter, her bloody hands leaving fresh stains on the granite. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and her voice was trembling like a candle in the wind. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. He's coming. Douglas is coming," he said. Her breath broke into a sob, and she pressed her good eye shut. "He said if I don't get him the money by next Friday, he's going to take me where no one will ever find me again." Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, headlights cut through the blizzard on the mountain road below, moving upward toward the lodge. The car was still far away, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. But it was coming. Anyone could see that. The lights grew larger, brighter, cutting through the white darkness like an approaching judgment. Marco stepped forward. "Boss, we should lock the doors," Nicholas said quietly. "All of them." The footsteps of his men echoed through the lodge as they moved to secure the perimeter. But Nicholas did not move. He stood there, 3 feet from the woman bleeding against his counter, and something shifted in his chest. Something cold and dangerous, yes, but underneath it, something else. Something he had not felt in a very long time. What neither of them knew in that moment was that the answer to this night, the entire architecture of everything that would follow, had already been recorded. 3 weeks ago, Nicholas had installed cameras throughout his property. Not to spy on staff, not for the paranoid obsession of a man watching territory he owned. He had installed them because of a promise he made to himself when he was a child, a promise made over the broken body of his own mother. Those cameras had recorded everything that happened 6 months earlier on a night that neither Aria nor Nicholas could have known would matter. Neither could have known that on that night, Aria had pulled a 7-year-old girl from a burning car without hesitation, saving her while asking for nothing in return. The headlights grew brighter. "What is your name?" Nicholas asked, his voice still soft. "Aria," she whispered. "Aria Sinclair." The car reached the base of the drive. But before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what is coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 6 months ago in Las Vegas, when Aria Sinclair was still invisible, still unknown, still believing that nothing in her life would ever change. 6 months earlier, the Las Vegas sun was brutal and unforgiving. It beat down on the parking lot of the Belmont Hotel like a hammer, turning the asphalt into something that could burn skin. Aria Sinclair walked across that parking lot in her black and white maid uniform, which was already soaked through with sweat by 8:08 in the morning. She was carrying a small paper bag containing her breakfast, which she had purchased for $3.50 at the corner store and would have to make last until her shift ended at 5 p.m. In her pocket, she had exactly $5. This was all she had left until Friday. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom in North Las Vegas that cost $620 a month. She worked housekeeping at the Belmont, 6 days a week, earning $12 an hour. The math was simple and brutal. After rent, after the minimum payment on her credit card, after the bus pass, after the utilities, there was almost nothing left. Some weeks there was truly nothing. Some weeks she ate the leftover food that guests left on their plates before the housekeeping team threw it away. She had a grandmother's recipe book, leather-bound and filled with Italian handwriting, filled with notes in the margins about love and family and the ways that food could tell stories. Her grandmother had died 3 years ago. That recipe book was the only thing she owned that had come from before, from the time when things made sense, when her mother was still alive, when the world had not yet arranged itself into this shape of endless poverty and terror. She pushed through the service entrance of the hotel, and the air conditioning hit her like a shock. The cold was almost painful after the heat outside. She clocked in at 9:02 a.m. Her supervisor, a woman named Patricia who had worked housekeeping for 23 years and had the permanent expression of someone who had given up on hope, handed her a stack of keys. 14th and 15th floors, Patricia said without looking up. Start with 1402. Aria nodded and moved through the corridor, pulling the housekeeping cart behind her. The hallways of the Belmont were carpeted in a carpet that was supposed to be elegant but was actually the color of old money, that greasy-looking beige that never quite came clean. The silence of the hallway was broken only by the sound of her cart wheels squeaking against the floor. Room 1402 was already vacant. The guests had left at 6 a.m., and the room was empty except for the debris of their stay. Towels on the floor, the bed unmade, the bathroom sink caked with toothpaste residue. There was a coffee cup with lipstick stains left on the nightstand, and a receipt from a restaurant showing charges for $427 for 3 people. Aria looked at that number for a moment. $427. That was almost a week of her rent. She cleaned the room in 43 minutes. She had learned to clean fast. Fast meant she could do more rooms, and more rooms meant slightly more money, and slightly more money meant the difference between eating and not eating on some weeks. By noon, she had cleaned 7 rooms. By 1 o'clock, 12. Her back was screaming. There was a pain in her lower spine that had started 3 years ago and had never left, just intensified with time, with the repetitive motion of scrubbing, bending, reaching. In room 1507, she found a $20 bill on the nightstand. A tip. She stared at it for a long moment, and her eyes filled with tears. $20. It seemed impossible that the world worked this way, that some people could leave $20 without thinking about it, and that $20 could mean food for a week for someone else. She pocketed the money and tried not to think about how that made the situation both better and worse. It was 4:38 p.m. when her phone rang. The phone was old, cracked screen, a model that had been released 4 years ago. The number on the screen was one she did not recognize. She should not have answered. She knew, somewhere in her body, that answering was a mistake. But she answered anyway. "Aria?" The voice was male, low, and something in its tone turned her blood into ice water. "Yes? This is Douglas Hale. I need to see you tonight. There's a situation we need to discuss. A debt that needs to be resolved." The cleaning supplies fell from her hands. They scattered across the carpeted floor, and she could not move to pick them up. "I paid you," she whispered. "I paid the $5,000. We were finished." "You paid the first installment," Douglas said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone, which made it infinitely worse. "But we discussed the full amount. $125,000, Aria. You have 2 weeks. The phone went silent except for the sound of her own breathing. "If you don't have the money by then," Douglas continued, "we're going to have to make other arrangements. I'm sure you understand what I mean." He hung up. Aria stood in the middle of room 1507, surrounded by cleaning supplies, and understood that her life had just split into before and after. Before this moment, there was at least the possibility that things could get better. After this moment, there was only mathematics. $125,000 in 2 weeks on a salary of $12 an hour. She did the math her entire bus ride home. $125,000 divided by her weekly earnings of $720. That was 173 weeks of work without spending a single penny on anything except the debt. That was 3 years. She did not have 3 years. She had 14 days. 14 days. That was all Aria Sinclair had left. $125,000 in 14 days on a salary that barely covered her rent. The phone call from Douglas Hale had rewired something fundamental in her body, some ancient survival mechanism that understood the mathematics of impossibility. She had sat on the bus ride home and done the calculations over and over, her fingers tracing the numbers in the condensation on the window. 173 weeks of work without spending a penny on food, water, shelter, or breath. 3 years compressed into 2 weeks. It could not be done. She knew, in the way a drowning person knows they are drowning, that she had run out of time. But that was later. That was the cliff she had not yet fallen from. To understand how Aria Sinclair ended up standing in a bus station with $5 in her pocket and a debt that could destroy her, you had to go back 6 months. You had to go back to a Tuesday in October when the Nevada heat still clung to everything like something alive. 5:30 in the morning came with the sound of the alarm clock in the staff quarters of the Bianchi estate. Aria opened her eyes in the darkness of the small room she shared with 2 other housekeeping staff, one of 15 people employed to keep the mansion running like a perfectly programmed machine. She did not need the alarm. Her body had learned to wake at exactly 5:30 whether she wanted to or not. Her hands moved through the darkness, reaching for the black and white uniform hanging on the back of her door, the fabric soft from 2 years of washing. She dressed without turning on the light. The other beds around her remained dark and still. In a few minutes, she would hear movement. In 10 minutes, the hallway would fill with the quiet sounds of staff preparing for the day. But for now, in this small window of silence, Aria stood before the mirror above the sink and looked at the face of a woman who had learned to be invisible. She was 27 years old but looked, in the harsh pre-dawn light, like someone who had already lived a lifetime. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from her face, not as a style choice but as a necessity. Long hair drew attention. Her eyes were brown and careful, the kind of eyes that had learned not to meet other people's gazes. Her skin was pale from years of working indoors, and her hands bore the permanent evidence of her labor. Calluses ran across her palms like a map of survival. The scars on her wrists were hidden under long sleeves. The worst scars, the ones that ran across her back like a landscape of pain, were hidden under the uniform that covered everything. She reached into the small drawer of her nightstand and withdrew $5. A single $5 bill. That was the amount Douglas Hale allowed her to keep each week from her wages. The rest went to him. Room and board, he said. Food expenses, he said. The debt, he said, was being paid down slowly. It had been 8 years since the day she met him, 8 years since her grandmother had died and left her alone in the world with nothing except a high school diploma and a recipe book with handwritten notes in the margins. She still had that recipe book. It was the only possession she had ever owned that Douglas had not taken from her. The hallway outside her room was cold tile and pale light. She moved through it silently, the way she had learned to move through the world. Visible but not noticed. Present but not seen. There were 14 other staff members in the mansion, and none of them knew her. Not really. They knew her name because they had to. They knew her face because they saw it every day. But they did not know her, in the way that you can live next to a shadow on the wall and never think to ask it questions. The work began at 6 o'clock. She started in the north wing of the mansion, dusting the hallway with its museum-quality photographs of the Bianchi family. 5 generations of men with the same dark eyes and the same careful expression. Expensive frames, all of them. Gold, some of them. The kind of frames that cost more than everything she owned. She dusted around them without looking at the faces. That was the skill she had perfected. You could be in a room with beautiful things, with expensive things, with things that represented more money than you would ever possess, and if you did not let yourself really see them, they could not make you desperate. By 7 o'clock, she had moved to the study on the 2nd floor. This was the work she both dreaded and craved. In the study, Nicholas Bianchi worked. She had seen him only in passing, a tall man with dark hair beginning to grey at the temples, a man who wore suits that cost more than a month of her wages. He had scars. She had noticed them once, a thin line running from his left eye toward his cheekbone, and she had looked away immediately because looking at him too long was how you became noticed. He never looked up from his work when she entered. He never acknowledged her presence at all. She moved through the study like a ghost, dusting the mahogany desk with its neat stacks of papers, dusting the shelves lined with leather-bound books that she suspected had never been read, dusting around him as if he were furniture, as if he were part of the landscape of expensive things that meant nothing to her. The silver in the dining room needs polish, she said quietly. It was not a request. It was a statement, a task assignment spoken from the household manager to the cleaning staff. She was reporting to him the work that needed to be done, the way a servant reports to her master. He did not look up. His pen continued moving across the paper in front of him. She waited for 2 seconds, which felt like 20, and then she left. This was her life. This was what 8 years had carved her into. A woman who moved through rooms without disturbing them. A woman who spoke only when spoken to, and spoke then only in the simplest words. A woman who had learned to make herself small. She did not know that every camera on the Bianchi estate was recording her. She did not know that Nicholas had installed those cameras not for the reasons that men like him typically installed cameras, but for one reason only. He had a daughter. Emma was 6 years old, and she was blind. She had been born without sight, and Nicholas Bianchi, who had built his entire life on the principle that you could never let anyone see your weakness, had decided that at least in his home, his daughter would be safe. The cameras were his attempt at omniscience. If he could see everything, perhaps he could protect her from the one thing he feared most. Change. Betrayal. Loss. Aria cleaned the mansion every day and never knew any of this. October 15th came like any other day. The Nevada heat had finally begun to break, and the mornings had a crispness to them that felt like mercy. She had finished her shift at 3 o'clock, the time when the household manager signed off on her work and she was free to leave the grounds. The bus stop was at the end of the long drive that wound through the Bianchi property. She walked it alone, as she always did, with her bag containing her grandmother's recipe book and the $5 she had earned. The sun was still high enough to hurt her eyes. She had lived in Las Vegas her entire life, but the sun never felt like home. The road curved, and beyond the gates of the estate, it curved again toward the highway. This was where she saw the car first. A black Mercedes, expensive and gleaming, traveling far too fast for the mountain road. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of an engine pushing beyond its limits, the sound of tires on asphalt that was suddenly frantic instead of smooth. She turned. The car was swerving. She could see the driver's hands on the wheel, jerking, overcorrecting. There was someone screaming inside. A child's voice, high and thin and full of absolute terror. The Mercedes hit the guardrail at an angle, metal shrieking against metal, and then it was airborne. Time moved strangely. She watched it flip once, twice, the sun catching the windshield and turning it into something that looked like a shooting star. Then it hit a tree on the other side of the road, and the impact was so violent that for a moment there was nothing but sound and smoke. Then Aria was running. She did not think about it. She did not weigh the decision. She simply ran toward the burning car with the same instinct that makes a body pull away from fire, except hers was pulling toward it. The smoke was thick and black and chemical, gasoline and burning rubber and something else, something that smelled like destruction. The front of the car was crushed. The driver was slumped over the steering wheel, not moving. But in the back seat, visible through the rear window, was a small child. A girl with dark hair, pressing her hands against the glass, screaming. Aria found a rock. She was not aware of finding it. It was simply in her hand. She smashed the rear window once, twice, the glass shattering into diamonds, and she reached through the opening, her hands cutting on the edges, and unbuckled the girl from her car seat. The metal of the seat belt was hot enough to burn her fingers. The child was small, impossibly small, and light as paper in her arms. Emma, though Aria did not know her name yet. Emma with the dark eyes wide with terror. Emma who had been born blind and would never see the face of the woman who saved her life. Aria ran. Behind her, the fuel tank exploded, and the heat of it pushed her forward like a hand between her shoulder blades. She collapsed on the side of the road, the girl still in her arms, both of them covered in soot and ash. The child was coughing, gasping for air, and Aria held her and did not let go. Her hands were bleeding. Her hair smelled like burned plastic. She sat on the side of the road and held a child she did not know and waited for the sirens she could already hear in the distance. Police arrived. Then paramedics. Then men in suits who moved differently than paramedics, with a kind of controlled urgency that suggested they were accustomed to emergencies. She gave her statement in a voice that barely trembled. No, she did not need medical attention. Yes, the child was the only survivor. No, she had not seen the driver's face. Yes, she worked on the Bianchi estate. No, she did not know who the child belonged to. She said all of this in the smallest voice, the voice of a woman who had learned to disappear. And then, before anyone could thank her, before anyone could ask for her name or take her photograph or make her visible in any way, she asked one of the paramedics if she could please use the bathroom, and she found the staff parking area, and she left. She did not know that the cameras on the Bianchi estate had recorded everything. The moment she noticed the car. The moment she ran toward it. The moment she reached through fire to pull a screaming child into her arms. 173 cameras, all positioned to see inside and outside the property, and one of them had been aimed at the road. What changed everything was that Nicholas Bianchi watched that footage the next morning. He watched it 100 times. He watched a woman in a black and white uniform run toward a burning car. He watched her smash glass with her bare hands. He watched her pull his daughter from death and hold her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And he watched her disappear before he ever had the chance to know her name. Aria did not know any of this when she returned to work on October 16th. She did not know that her hands, bandaged from the burns, had already been noticed by the household manager. She did not know that Nicholas Bianchi had watched her save his daughter's life on camera 173 times. She did not know that her face, invisible to the world, had become the only thing he could see. She only knew that she had 6 months left on her debt before Douglas Hale came to collect. The November wind carried the scent of pine and gasoline as 3 black SUVs climbed the mountain road through falling snow. Inside the lead vehicle, Douglas Hale adjusted his camel coat and checked his phone one more time. The tracking device on Aria's uniform had stopped moving 47 minutes ago at coordinates that matched a residential property in the mountains outside Las Vegas. She was running. She was always running. But running cost money, and money was the one thing Aria Sinclair had never possessed. Back in Las Vegas, in an office on the 42nd floor of the Bianchi Tower, Nicholas Bianchi sat motionless in front of a wall of monitors. 23 security feeds from his mountain lodge flickered across the screens in shades of blue and gray. He had installed cameras at this property 3 weeks ago, after the accident that nearly took Emma's life. 3 weeks ago, when a woman in a housekeeping uniform had pulled his daughter from a burning car and then walked away as if she had done nothing extraordinary at all. Marco stood to his left, silent as always. In 15 years of service, Marco had learned that Nicholas's quiet moments were more dangerous than his angry ones. The boss's fingers rested on the desk, perfectly still, but his jaw moved slightly, grinding the way it did when rage was building beneath the surface. "We have the information you requested," Marco said, sliding a folder across the mahogany surface. "The woman who saved Emma. Aria Sinclair." Nicholas did not take his eyes from the monitors. "Tell me." "She was hired 8 months ago through Douglas Hale's staffing agency. Temporary placement for housekeeping, 3rd floor East Wing. 31 shifts. She has never called in sick. Never arrived late. Never spoken to anyone except when required for work." "Age," Nicholas said. 27. Nicholas finally turned from the screens. His face was carved from shadow, the scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone deepening as he frowned. "What do we know about her employment history before 8 months ago?" Marco hesitated. This was the part that did not sit right with him, the part that had made him dig deeper after the boss's initial request. "That is where it becomes complicated, sir. There are no records. No social security before 8 years ago. No apartment leases, no utility bills, no documented employment. It is as though she did not exist before then." The office fell silent except for the gentle hum of the servers cooling the electronics. Nicholas stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Las Vegas. The city sprawled below them in glittering excess, every light a story of wealth or desperation, often both at once. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man who had clawed his way from the streets of South Boston to this view, this power, this prison of stone and ambition. He thought of Emma, 6 years old, with his dark eyes and her mother's gentle spirit. He thought of the video he had watched 100 times. The moment Aria noticed the smoking vehicle. The moment she ran toward the flames without hesitation, without calculation, without expecting anything in return. "Douglas Hale," Nicholas said quietly. "He does not run a staffing agency." "No, sir," Marco confirmed. "We have connected him to 6 women placed in households across the city in the past year. All through the same agency. All with incomplete background records. All making regular deposits to accounts controlled by someone registered as Diana Whitfield." Nicholas turned back to face his lieutenant. "Diana Whitfield. The Whitfield family. Old money. Philanthropist. She funds half the charities in Nevada." "Yes, sir. But our sources suggest she also funds something else." The rain began then, pounding against the windows with sudden violence, the sound like gravel being thrown against glass. It was the kind of rain that came before a storm, the kind that made the sky turn the color of a bruise. "Find Aria Sinclair," Nicholas said, returning to his desk. "I want her full schedule, her residence, her habits. I want to know every place she goes and every person she contacts. Sir, if Douglas Hale placed her through his agency." Then she is in debt to a trafficker and walking toward a cage she does not yet understand, Nicholas finished. Find her. 3 days later, Marco returned with an expression that suggested he had solved a puzzle that made his stomach turn. She lives in a studio apartment on the east side of the city. $600 a month. She works double shifts, cleaning for your household and for 3 other families. Combined income, she makes approximately $1,800 a month. Nicholas waited. The apartment lease is in Douglas Hale's company name, Marco continued. The deposit was paid by him. The utilities are on automatic deduction from her wages. By the time her rent and living expenses clear, she has approximately $80 left each month for everything else. Food, transportation, medical care. $80, sir. For 30 days. The 2 men exchanged a look that spoke the language they had used for 15 years. Marco had seen this before in their world, the casual brutality of it, the way systems of control work better than chains because chains announce themselves. There is something else, Marco said. We found her in our household system. She is not just any member of staff. She was here, working, the night of Emma's accident. She was supposed to finish her shift at 8 p.m., but she stayed late, finishing the second-floor bathrooms. She was leaving the property when she saw the car. Nicholas stood slowly. His mind had just completed a calculation that made everything click into place, a pattern emerging from chaos like a blade cutting through fog. She was here, he said, understanding crystallizing. She was on our property for 8 months and I walked past her 50 times without ever seeing her face. Yes, sir. And she saved Emma's life. Yes, sir. Nicholas moved toward the window again, but this time he was not looking at Las Vegas. He was looking inward, at the memory of his mother, at the memory of his father's hands, at the memory of being 7 years old in a basement apartment in South Boston and swearing that he would never let anyone be invisible again. That he would never let anyone suffer alone. He had built an empire on that promise. Weapons and money and men in tailored suits who moved like shadows. All of it, in some fractured way, was his attempt to keep a broken oath made by a boy who did not understand that you could not save everyone. But you could save one person. Sometimes, one person was enough. I need access to the Mountain Lodge's system, Nicholas said. I want to install additional cameras. Perimeter coverage, road surveillance, interior feeds. Everything. Sir, the lodge already has comprehensive security. I am not asking for a discussion, Nicholas interrupted, and his voice was the voice of a man who had learned long ago that power came from certainty. I am going to protect that woman whether she knows I am doing it or not. Get it done by tomorrow. The installation took 18 hours. By the time the technicians finished, the Mountain Lodge had become a fortress of invisible eyes, a web of monitoring that stretched from the property line to every interior room. 73 cameras, all positioned with careful precision. Most of them to watch for external threats. But one of them, positioned above the fireplace in the main living area, pointed at the space where someone could sit and simply exist, protected by the constant attention of a man she did not know was watching. The weather report predicted a blizzard for the evening of October 16th. The forecast called for 12 inches of snow and temperatures dropping to 18 degrees by midnight. It was exactly the kind of night that made roads treacherous and people desperate. It was exactly the kind of night when someone might run. Aria had $5 in her pocket and 2 weeks before Douglas Hale came to collect his debt. 14 days before everything changed. She did not know that the cameras were waiting. She did not know that Nicholas Bianchi had spent 3 weeks learning the invisible geography of her life. She did not know that a man who controlled half of Las Vegas had just made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their futures. What she knew was the wind. What she knew was the sound of an engine on the mountain road. What she knew was that running had never saved her before, but that standing still saved nobody at all. The city lights spread below like fallen stars, cold and distant and unreachable. Aria Sinclair stood on the balcony of Nicholas Bianchi's Las Vegas penthouse at 4:30 in the morning, her borrowed clothes hanging loose on her shoulders, the October wind cutting through the fabric like a blade wrapped in ice. She gripped the railing with white knuckles, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold on. 8 years. 8 years of Douglas Hale's hands on her body. 8 years of Diana Whitfield's smile while she counted the money from Aria's suffering. The scars on her back throbbed in the cold, a permanent map of every night she had begged him to stop, every night he had not listened. She thought about the way Diana had watched once, sipping champagne in a silk dress that cost more than Aria's entire life, and smiled like she was watching a beautiful sunset instead of a woman being destroyed. Her fingers ached against the metal railing. The wind howled across the empty streets far below, and Aria closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother. She thought about the recipe book with notes in the margins, the one thing she had managed to keep hidden through everything. Her grandmother's handwriting, faded and careful, for Aria's future. For the life she will build when she is finally free. But what future? What building? She was poison. Everyone she touched suffered. Nicholas had a daughter. Emma. A small girl with dark eyes and trust written all over her face, and Aria was dragging all of them into hell with her. Maybe it would be better if she just walked away. Maybe if she let Douglas take her, let him drag her back into whatever darkness waited, at least Nicholas and Emma would be safe. At least she would stop contaminating their lives with her broken pieces. Aria's breathing came in shallow gasps. The city below did not care. The stars did not care. Nothing cared. Then a sound. Small feet on tile. A voice like morning itself. Miss Aria? Are you okay? Emma stood in the doorway wearing princess pajamas, her hair tangled from sleep, rubbing her eyes with both fists. She was 6 years old and fearless in the way only children can be, and she was looking at Aria with concern written across her small face. Aria turned away from the edge of the railing. Her legs moved before her mind gave permission. She walked toward Emma and knelt down so their eyes were level, and she made her face into something that looked like a smile. I am okay, sweetie. Just looking at the stars, Aria whispered. Emma considered this with the gravity of childhood. Stars are sad sometimes. My daddy says they are very far away and lonely. She reached out and took Aria's hand. You do not have to be lonely. You can be here. That small voice. That small hand in hers. Aria felt something shift inside her chest, like ice cracking under sudden heat. This child had saved her life more than once. Aria had pulled Emma from a burning car 6 months ago, and Emma had forgotten about the fear within an hour. But Aria had not forgotten. Emma's heartbeat against her chest. Emma's trust. Emma's voice saying, "You saved me." And Aria had been ready to walk away from her. Come, Aria said, and she led Emma to the couch. She wrapped the child in blankets and opened the recipe book, the one with her grandmother's notes in the margins. The pages were soft from handling, the handwriting shaky in places where her grandmother's hands had trembled with age. Emma curled against her, listening to Aria read about measurements and techniques and love baked into every line. The wind continued to howl outside the windows, but inside the penthouse, there was warmth. There was a child breathing softly against her shoulder. There was the possibility that maybe, just maybe, some people were worth staying for. Nicholas found them like that at 6 in the morning. He stood in the doorway in his black shirt, his dark eyes taking in the scene, and something in his expression shifted like a door opening. He met Aria's eyes over his daughter's sleeping head, and his jaw tightened. He understood. He knew how close he had come to losing her. He did not speak. He simply sat down on the edge of the couch and placed his hand on Aria's back, solid and real and present. At exactly 6 o'clock that same morning, 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts through Douglas Hale's Las Vegas estate. The sprawling property sat in the desert beyond the city limits, surrounded by high walls and security cameras that Nicholas's team had disabled for minutes earlier. The sun had not risen yet. The darkness was absolute. Marco led the entry team, his movements precise and economical. Behind him came 11 more men, all of them moving with the kind of coordination that came from years of working together. They carried equipment that cost more than most people's homes. Their boots made no sound on the imported marble floors. Dario coordinated from a van parked 3 blocks away, watching feeds from the disabled security cameras, his voice steady in everyone's earpieces. East wing clear. Moving to 2nd floor. Nicholas Bianchi walked through the front door last, moving slowly, with no urgency. He wore a charcoal suit that cost $4,000 and an expression of absolute calm. For the next hour, he owned this place. Every room, every secret, every hidden thing belonged to him now. Douglas Hale was dragged from his bed wearing silk pajamas, the fabric tearing as he struggled against the hands that gripped him. He was 53 years old and soft in the way of men who had never earned their power through legitimate means. His screaming filled the hallway. "You cannot do this. I have lawyers. I will call the police. You do not know who you are dealing with." Nicholas sat in Douglas's leather office chair, crossing one leg over the other. He did not respond to the screaming. He simply waited, his patience like a weapon, until Douglas was thrown to his knees in front of him, held in place by Marco and another man named Salvatore. "You made a mistake 3 days ago," Nicholas said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath. "You came to my mountain. You threatened someone I protect. And that mistake is going to cost you everything." Douglas's face was red, his eyes bulging. "Please. I will forgive the debt. She can keep the $5. She can keep her life. Just let me go. I will leave Las Vegas tonight. You will never see me again." "No," Nicholas said. He pulled out a folder from the desk drawer, and inside were photographs. 12 women. Aria at 19 years old, thin and terrified. A girl named Rebecca with bruises around her neck. A woman named Sophia with dead eyes. Forged contracts. Bank records. Communications between Douglas and Diana Whitfield, 2 predators counting their profit from human suffering. "I found all of them," Nicholas continued. "Every woman you have trapped. Every lie you told them. Every percentage point you paid to Diana Whitfield so she could maintain her mansion and her charity galas and her reputation as a pillar of the community." He smiled. "And I made some phone calls." At 6:47 in the morning, FBI vehicles arrived at Douglas Hale's estate with federal warrants. By that time, Nicholas and his men were gone, dissolved into the desert like smoke. But the evidence remained, planted by careful hands in careful places where federal agents were designed to find it. Financial records showing decades of trafficking operations. Communications between Douglas and Diana. Photographs. Audio recordings. Everything necessary to destroy a man completely. The FBI agents led Douglas away screaming about lawyers and rights and protection, but there was no protection for him. There was only the federal system and the 20-year minimum sentence for human trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering. But Diana Whitfield was having problems of her own. At 7:15 in the morning, Diana answered her door to find Nicholas Bianchi standing on her threshold. She was 58 years old with silver hair twisted into a perfect knot, wearing a cream silk robe that cost $2,000. Her composure was legendary in Las Vegas society, the kind of composure built on decades of corruption and careful connections. She did not lose that composure when she saw Nicholas. "Mr. Bianchi," she said with icy politeness. "I was not expecting visitors at this hour." "I am here to discuss your business partnership with Douglas Hale," Nicholas replied. Diana's expression did not change. "I have no idea what you are talking about. If you are referring to the staffing agency, that is a completely legitimate business venture, Anne." Nicholas placed a tablet on her hall table and pressed play. Audio filled the space. Diana's own voice, discussing percentages and profit margins. Douglas's voice, laughing about how easy it was to keep the women compliant. Diana's voice again, make sure she stays grateful. Grateful women do not run. Diana's face went white. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "You preyed on desperate women," Nicholas said, his voice dropping lower. "You watched them suffer and you took your percentage. You smiled while their lives broke into pieces. And you made the mistake of targeting someone who matters to me. He straightened. The FBI is coming for you, Diana. Every account. Every property. Every senator you thought you owned. They are coming. He turned and walked away without waiting for her response. By 8 o'clock in the morning, federal agents were leading Diana Whitfield from her mansion in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattering like glass. She screamed about lawyers and frame jobs and injustice, and the Las Vegas news cameras caught every moment. Her reputation, built over 40 years, destroyed in 40 minutes. Nicholas watched from across the street, then turned and walked away. Justice is not death, he thought. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. Diana Whitfield would spend the next 40 years in federal prison watching everything she had built turn to ash, watching the senators she had paid abandon her, watching her name become synonymous with cruelty and greed. Douglas Hale faced a different kind of justice. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Douglas was being transported in an FBI vehicle that took a wrong turn down a desert road. The vehicle stopped. The agents got out and walked away without looking back because they were not agents at all, but men on loan from the Castellano family, one of the few organizations in Las Vegas that could compete with Nicholas's power. Douglas Hale screamed when he saw them. He had testified against their brother 5 years ago, sent a man to prison. The Castellanos did not forgive. No. No. Bianchi promised me protection. He promised. But Nicholas Bianchi had promised no such thing. He had simply made a phone call and given the Castellanos a gift, the man who had destroyed their family. The phone call lasted 14 seconds. The justice lasted considerably longer. Douglas Hale disappeared into the desert that afternoon, dragged away screaming into a darkness he would never escape. Sometimes justice was not legal. Sometimes it was simply necessary. 2 weeks after federal agents led Diana Whitfield from her mansion in handcuffs, after Douglas Hale disappeared into the desert and the last of the screaming faded into silence, Aria Sinclair stood in front of a bedroom mirror in Nicholas Bianchi's mountain lodge and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. The bruises were fading. Yellow now, instead of purple. The swelling around her left eye had receded enough that she could see clearly again, could move without wincing, could breathe without feeling like her ribs were made of broken glass. But the real healing was happening in the places no one could see. A soft knock on the door frame. Nicholas stood in the threshold, still moving with that careful deliberation he used around her, as if she might startle like a wounded animal. Which, until very recently, she had been. The doctor finished examining the scars, he said quietly. She wanted me to tell you before you see the results. Aria turned slowly, her hand rising to the back of her neck where the worst of them lived. 8 years of marks, laid out like a geography of pain. What did she say? That they will fade. Not disappear completely. Fading takes time. But they can be treated, reduced, made less visible. He paused. She also said that you are healing faster than she expected. Your body is strong, Aria. Stronger than what tried to break it. Aria looked down at her hands. These hands had pulled Emma from a burning car. These hands had hidden money for women she could never save. These hands had learned to be invisible so thoroughly that even now, standing in daylight, she half expected to vanish. How are you feeling? Nicholas asked. She turned to face him fully. For the first time in 8 years, she was not afraid to be seen. Free, she said quietly. I feel free. That night, they sat by the fireplace as snow fell in thick white curtains beyond the windows. Emma was playing with her dolls on the carpet, narrating an elaborate story about a princess and a dragon, the kind of innocent monologue only a child could create. The fire crackled, steady and warm. I found all of them, Nicholas said without preamble. The other 11 women from Douglas's network. Every single one. Aria's head turned toward him. What do you mean you found them? I mean I found them, and I gave them their contracts. The originals Douglas kept. I gave them their papers, their identification, their freedom. And I set up accounts for each of them. Enough money to start over. New names if they want them. New lives, away from that network, away from anything that could pull them back. Aria's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, Nicholas said, meeting her gaze. Because you would have. If you had the power and the resources, you would have done exactly that. And because those women deserve to know that they are not invisible anymore. That someone sees them. That someone is willing to fight for them. The tears spilled over. 8 years of trying to save people she could not save, 8 years of carrying their weight, and now this man, this dangerous man with scars and an empire built on violence, had done what she could never do. He had saved them all. Tell me, Nicholas said. Tell me everything. Not just the night you came to me. All of it. So Aria told him. She told him about the day at 19 when a man in an expensive suit promised her money and security and a life away from her dying mother. She told him about the moment she realized the papers he had her sign were not contracts but chains. She told him about the women she had tried to help, smuggling food, hiding money, teaching them English phrases so they could ask for help. She told him about the girl named Sophia who died trying to escape, and how Aria had held her in the darkness and promised she would not be forgotten. She told him about the day she saw Ember in the street, 7 years into her captivity, and how the little girl had smiled at her. How something in Aria had simply decided that this one child, at least, would not suffer the way Aria had suffered. I pulled her from the car because I could not stand to see another innocent person hurt, Aria said. Not because I was brave. Because I was so tired of being powerless. Nicholas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. My father taught me that the world is divided into predators and prey, he finally said. He was a predator. My mother was prey. And I swore I would never be either one. I would build something where prey could become powerful, where children would not watch their mothers fade into silence, where the powerless would never be crushed again. He turned to look at her. We are the same, you and I. We were both destroyed by people who should have protected us. And we both chose to save someone anyway. Aria asked the question that had haunted her for 2 weeks. The cameras you installed. You said you put them everywhere to protect Emma. But you kept watching after the accident. Why did you keep watching me? Nicholas was silent. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the mountains like something alive. Because I saw the way you moved through my house, he finally said. Invisible. Silent. Afraid. And I recognized it. I was that child once, Aria. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to disappear. And I could not look away. She realized then. He had been protecting her since the day he found out who she was. The cameras had never been just about Emma. They had been about her too. Nicholas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. His hand touched the side of her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. You saved my daughter, he said. And then, without knowing it, you saved me too. Because the night you stumbled into my kitchen bleeding and terrified, I had a choice. I could turn away like my father always did. Or I could fight for someone who deserved it. You gave me that choice. Aria covered his hand with hers. You gave me my life back. No, Nicholas said. You never lost it. Douglas took 8 years, but he never took you. You are still here. Still fighting. Still saving people even when no one saves you. The next morning, Emma came running to Aria with a drawing she had made, crayon bright and unmistakably intentional. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a lodge, mountains rising behind them in purple and blue. This is our family, Emma announced proudly, her voice certain in a way that made Aria's heart break and mend simultaneously. Aria looked at Nicholas, uncertainty in her eyes. Was she allowed to want this? To be part of something that looked like family? Nicholas smiled, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him, unguarded and real. Family, he agreed. And for the first time in 8 years, Aria believed she might be safe. 3 months later, on Christmas Eve, Aria stood in the kitchen of the mountain lodge wearing jeans and a soft sweater, her grandmother's recipe book open in front of her, the margins filled with notes in handwriting that had been dead for 7 years. Emma was beside her, flour dusting both their faces, her small hands learning the careful work of folding dough. "Like this?" Emma asked. "Exactly like that," Aria said. "My grandmother taught my mother, and my mother would have taught me, but—" She stopped. There was no need to finish. Emma understood, in the way children do, that some stories have missing chapters. Nicholas entered with Marco and Dario, bringing firewood for the hearth, and the ease of it struck Aria like a physical blow. This domestic scene. This normalcy. The two men awkward in the kitchen but trying, because their boss had chosen this, and what Nicholas Bianchi chose, they supported. The snow falling outside in thick white curtains. The smell of cinnamon and honey and butter. Emma's laughter filling the space where screaming used to live. That evening, at the long wooden table with the fire crackling beside them, Emma told stories about school. Marco and Dario listened politely, the men in dark suits transformed into something almost tender by the presence of a child. Nicholas watched Aria with quiet contentment, and she felt it like a physical thing, the weight of being seen by someone who chose to stay. After Emma was asleep, they stood on the balcony under stars so bright they seemed impossible. The December cold bit at their skin, but neither of them moved. Wrapped in blankets, they stood together in the darkness. Diana Whitfield's appeal was denied, Nicholas said. 40 years. Federal prison. No parole. And Douglas? Aria asked, though she already knew. Remains were found in the desert 3 days ago. The Costillanos were thorough. Aria should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Justice. But all she felt was tired. The exhaustion of someone who has carried too much for too long. "Is it wrong that I am not sorry they are gone?" she asked. Nicholas pulled her closer. "No. It is human. They took 8 years from you. You are allowed to be glad they cannot take any more." Aria looked up at the stars, thinking of the girl she had been at 19. That girl was gone now. Burned away in the fire of survival. She was someone new. Someone who had fought through hell and come out the other side with her humanity intact. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Nicholas said. "We build something they could not destroy. We show Emma what family really means. We choose each other every day." The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned clear and cold and perfect. Inside the lodge, Emma slept upstairs, safe in a room with windows that looked out at mountains. Aria stood looking out at that view, Nicholas beside her, and understood something fundamental about freedom. She had thought it meant being alone. Being invisible. Being safe because no one could hurt you if no one could see you. But real freedom was being seen by someone who chose to stay. Real freedom was fighting for each other when the storm came. Real family was not bound by blood but by those who chose to stand beside you when everything else fell apart. Nicholas's hand found hers. Their fingers intertwined. The fire burned steady in the hearth. "This is what safe feels like," she thought. "This is what home means." If this story moved your heart, please drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story that will change the way you see the world. Comment below and tell us, have you ever been saved by someone you least expected? I read every single comment, and your words matter to us. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. You are not invisible. You matter. And your story is not over. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. We will see you in the next video.